Stop for a moment and feel the weight of this silence. You are living through the final years of humanity as it has always existed. Not because we will become extinct, but because in 6 years, children will be born into a world so radically different from ours that they will be unable to comprehend how we lived before. Imagine trying to explain to a child of 2030 what it was like to be alone with your own thoughts, without instant access to the collective wisdom of millions of other minds. Or how would you describe the strange experience of not knowing whether a childhood memory really happened or was synthetically implanted? She would look at you with the same bewilderment you would feel if someone tried to explain what it was like to live without electricity or writing. At this very moment, as you listen to these words, the last generation of pure humans is reaching adulthood. Your children, if they haven't been born yet, will grow up neurologically connected to each other from the cradle, will think with the aid of artificial intelligences more powerful than any genius in history, and will build intimate relationships with people who never existed physically. They won't be less human than us, but their experience of being human will be as different from ours as ours is from that of a hunter-gatherer from 10,000 years ago. And all of this is not happening in some distant and abstract future. It's happening now in the laboratories where you work, in the schools where your children study, in the apps you use to distract yourself after a difficult day. In 2030, you will look back and realize that the greatest transformation in human history happened silently, disguised as entertainment and convenience. Today, we will explore exactly how this transformation is unfolding, why it is irreversible, and what you need to know, not just to survive it, but to thrive in a reality that will redefine the very meaning of being alive. To understand the magnitude of the transformations that await us, we must first recognize that we live at the end of a specific historical era. For approximately 10,000 years since the agricultural revolution, humanity has organized itself around 3 fundamental pillars: defined physical territories, social hierarchies based on the control of material resources, and knowledge systems transmitted between generations through language and writing. These pillars created the foundations for everything we call civilization. Cities, states, religions, economies, and cultural identities. Even the great revolutions of recent centuries, including the Industrial Revolution and the Information Revolution, operated within this same basic framework. They changed the tools, but did not alter the fundamental structure of human experience. A 12th century peasant and a 20th century worker shared much more in common than we imagine. Both lived in a concrete physical world, worked with their hands and bodies, formed face-to-face relationships, and depended on local institutions to organize their lives. Their identities were shaped by where they were born, what family they belonged to, and what community welcomed them. This pattern remained relatively stable for millennia, creating the illusion that the human condition is fixed and immutable. However, between 2020 and 2030, 3 simultaneous revolutions are destroying these ancient foundations and creating something completely new. The first is the artificial intelligence revolution, which is transferring decision-making capacity from humans to algorithms. The second is the synthetic reality revolution, which is dissolving the boundary between what is real and what is simulated. The third is the neurobiological connectivity revolution, which is expanding human consciousness beyond the limits of our individual brain. Each of these revolutions, in isolation, would be sufficient to transform society radically. Together, they are creating a convergence that will make 2030 the first year of the post-human era, not because we will cease to be biologically human, but because our life experience will become so different from the experience of all previous generations that we will need new categories to describe it. The first transformation that will make 2030 unrecognizable is the massive transfer of decisions to artificial intelligence systems. At this moment, as you listen to these words, algorithms are already determining what music you listen to, what news you read, what products you buy, and even who you might romantically relate to. But this is just the beginning. In 2030, AI will be making decisions about your career, your health, your financial investments, and even what kind of person you should become to maximize your happiness. Imagine waking up and receiving a notification. Based on analysis of your biometric data, sleep patterns, and neural activity during dreams, we recommend that you end your current relationship and move to Seattle, where your chances of finding a compatible partner increase by 340%. Additionally, a career change to biotechnology would result in 23% more professional satisfaction. Would you like us to implement these changes automatically? This is not science fiction. The technology to make these analyses and predictions already exists. What is changing is our willingness to accept that machines can understand our needs better than we ourselves do. The result of this transfer of decisions will be the creation of a new class of humans, assisted humans and autonomous humans. Assisted humans will live AI-optimized lives with every aspect of their existence continuously adjusted to maximize their well-being, productivity, and satisfaction. They will no longer need to worry about difficult choices because algorithms will make the choices for them. Autonomous humans will maintain control over their decisions, but will pay a high price for this autonomy. Their lives will be statistically less happy, less healthy, and less productive. It will be like choosing to drive a manual car on a road full of perfectly coordinated autonomous vehicles. Technically possible, but increasingly dangerous and impractical. This division will not be based on income or education, but on a fundamental philosophical choice. Do you prefer an optimized life or a self-determined life? In 2030, this will be the question that defines your identity more than your nationality, religion, or profession. Simultaneously, with the AI revolution, we are witnessing the dissolution of the boundary between reality and simulation. The generation born after 2020 will be the first in human history to grow up in a world where creating convincing synthetic experiences is easier than documenting real experiences. An 8-year-old child today can use free apps to create videos where she appears talking to dinosaurs, flying in space, or having an intimate conversation with any famous person alive or dead. For this generation, the question, did this really happen, will become progressively less relevant, then was this a meaningful experience? By 2030, the quality of synthetic experiences will be indistinguishable from reality, not just visually, but in all senses, including touch, smell, and even implanted false memories. You will be able to have a conversation with a digital version of a loved one who died, and this conversation will feel completely real, including mannerisms, shared memories, and authentic emotional reactions. This transformation is creating what researchers call fluid reality, where the distinction between real and synthetic memories becomes impossible to determine. In 2030, it will be common for people to have difficulty distinguishing whether a striking childhood experience really happened or was an advanced simulation. Even more disturbing, we will discover that this distinction matters less than we thought. If a synthetic experience generates the same emotions, the same learnings, and the same personal transformations as a real experience, in what sense is it less valid? This question will force humanity to rethink fundamental concepts like authenticity, truth, and meaning. In 2030, people will build entire identities based on experiences that never happened in the traditional sense, but that profoundly shaped who they became. The third revolution that will transform 2030 is the expansion of human consciousness through direct neurobiological interfaces. By the end of this decade, the first generation of safe and accessible neural implants will be widely available, allowing humans to connect directly to each other and to external information systems. This does not just mean browsing the internet with thought, but sharing subjective experiences, emotions, and even fragments of personality with other people. Imagine being able to literally feel what another person is feeling, not as metaphorical empathy, but as direct sensory experience, or having instant access to the accumulated knowledge of experts in any field, not as external information, but as if it were your own expertise. In 2030, couples will be able to choose to partially synchronize their emotional experiences, creating levels of intimacy that humanity has never experienced. Parents will be able to share memories directly with their children, transmitting not just stories, but the complete sensory and emotional experiences that shaped their lives. This expansion of consciousness will create new types of collective identity that transcend the individualism that has defined recent centuries. Small groups of neurologically connected people will develop a form of distributed consciousness where the boundaries between I and we become fluid. These groups, which researchers call collective minds, will not be hive minds without individuality, but conscious networks where each participant maintains their unique personality while sharing specific aspects of their experience with others. A collective mind focused on scientific research could share insights and intuitions instantly, accelerating discoveries exponentially. A collective mind dedicated to art could create works that no isolated individual would be capable of imagining. Most importantly, these new forms of consciousness will not replace individuality, but will offer an alternative for those who choose to explore expanded forms of existence. I want to pause for a moment to ask you directly, which aspect of this future we are exploring most awakens your curiosity or apprehension? Do you lie awake at night thinking about how these transformations will affect your own life and that of your loved ones? I know that we often keep these deep reflections to ourselves, perhaps for fear of seeming excessively speculative in a world that privileges the immediate and concrete. But your reflections on the future are important and probably shared by more people than you imagine. If this exploration is resonating with your own questions about the future, share in the comments. My greatest curiosity about 2030 is, or what worries me most about these changes is, your perspective can help others articulate their own thoughts about these transformations, and maybe together we can develop a more complete understanding of what awaits us. But how will these three simultaneous revolutions affect practical aspects of daily life in 2030? Let's start with work, which is perhaps the area where changes will be most immediately visible. The vast majority of jobs that exist today will simply cease to exist, not because they were automated, but because they became irrelevant. In 2030, the economy will be organized around three types of activity: creation of synthetic experiences, maintenance of AI systems, and facilitation of connections between collective minds. Traditional professions, from medicine to education, will be transformed so radically that they will become unrecognizable. A doctor in 2030 will be primarily a designer of personalized therapeutic experiences, creating synthetic environments where patients can explore and resolve traumas or psychological conditions in safe, controlled spaces. A teacher will be an architect of knowledge journeys, creating immersive experiences where students not only learn about history, but temporarily live as people from other eras, feeling their emotions, facing their challenges, and understanding their perspectives in a visceral way impossible through books or lectures. The concept of career as a linear progression through a specific area of expertise will become obsolete. Instead, people will develop portfolios of capabilities that can be combined in creative ways to solve specific problems or create unique experiences. A person could simultaneously be a trauma therapist using virtual reality, a designer of synthetic gastronomic experiences, and a facilitator of collective minds specialized in poetry. These combinations, which today seem random, will make complete sense in the economy of 2030, where value will be created through the creative synthesis of apparently unrelated capabilities. More importantly, work will cease to be an economic necessity for survival and will become a form of personal expression and contribution to the collective human experience. Human relationships will also undergo a radical transformation that will make them unrecognizable compared to current patterns. In 2030, it will be common for people to maintain simultaneous intimate relationships with biologically real humans, with AIs with complex personalities, and with synthetic versions of people who existed in other eras or who are creative compositions of multiple personalities. A person will be able to have a deep conversation about philosophy with an AI that incorporates the thinking of Socrates, Confucius, and Virginia Woolf, a romantic experience with a biological partner who shares their emotions through neural interface, and a lasting friendship with a synthetic version of a deceased loved one, whose personality patterns were preserved and continue evolving, these will not be substitutions for real relationships, but entirely new forms of human connection that dramatically expand the possibilities of intimacy, understanding, and personal growth. The concept of family will also evolve to include connections that transcend biology and geography. Collective minds will form bonds that are deeper than genetic kinship, creating networks of care and support that persist through decades. A child born in 2030 could have biological parents, adoptive parents, AI mentors specialized in different aspects of their development, and be part of a collective mind that includes other children around the world with similar interests. This child will grow up with a sense of identity that is simultaneously deeply individual and deeply connected to a global network of meaningful relationships. The concepts of loneliness and isolation, which tormented previous generations, will become practically impossible for those who choose to participate in these new forms of connectivity. The structure of cities and physical spaces will also be reimagined to accommodate these new forms of existence. In 2030, most urban spaces will serve multiple simultaneous functions through layers of synthetic reality. A public park during the day could simultaneously be a virtual research laboratory for remotely connected scientists, an immersive therapy space for people working through traumas, and a social environment for collective minds exploring forms of collaborative art. The same physical location will host hundreds of different experiences, each invisible to those who are not participating in it. This means that cities will become exponentially denser in terms of human activity without necessarily growing physically. It will be possible for millions of people to have meaningful experiences in the same geographical space without necessarily being aware of each other. This overlay of realities will create new challenges and opportunities for social organization. Governments will have to regulate not only physical actions, but synthetic experiences that can have real psychological impacts. What is the legal responsibility of someone who creates a traumatic experience in virtual reality? How to protect children from harmful content when this content can be immersive experiences indistinguishable from reality? How to ensure that collective minds do not develop dynamics that harm their individual participants? These questions will force the creation of new ethical and legal frameworks that we currently cannot even imagine. In 2030, the profession of synthetic realities ethicist will be as common and essential as lawyers are today, but perhaps the most profound transformation of 2030 will be the change in our relationship with mortality and the continuity of consciousness. When personalities can be digitally preserved and experiences can be synthetic, death ceases to be a definitive end and becomes more like a change of state. In 2030, it will be possible for deceased people to continue participating in the lives of their loved ones through synthetic versions that incorporate their personalities, memories, and thought patterns. These versions will not be simple recordings, but entities that continue learning, growing, and evolving, creating new memories and developing new perspectives based on their original personalities. A grandmother who died in 2030 could continue offering advice, sharing stories, and forming new relationships with grandchildren born after her physical death. This synthetic continuity of consciousness raises fundamental philosophical questions about the nature of identity and the human soul that will define the decade's debates. If a synthetic version of a person preserves their memories, personality, thought patterns, and capacity for growth, in what sense is it less real than the original version? And if that synthetic version eventually becomes different from the original person through new experiences, which of the two has greater claim to the original identity? These are not abstract questions, but practical dilemmas that millions of families will face in 2030. Humanity will need to develop new rituals, traditions, and ethical frameworks to navigate this new reality where physical death is no longer synonymous with the end of participation in life. The implications of these transformations for the structure of society are monumental. Political systems based on geographical territories will become progressively irrelevant when the most significant communities exist in virtual spaces or as globally distributed collective minds. In 2030, it will be common for a person to feel more loyalty and connection to an international collective mind focused on environmental preservation than to the country where they were born. National identities, which have shaped politics for recent centuries, will compete with identities based on shared values, common synthetic experiences, or direct neural connections. A person could simultaneously be a Brazilian citizen, a member of a collective mind dedicated to classical music with participants from 40 countries, and part of a virtual community that exists entirely in synthetic realities. This fragmentation and multiplication of identities will force the creation of new forms of governance that transcend the traditional structures of the nation-state. In 2030, supranational organizations based on affinities and shared values will have more influence on people's daily lives than territorially elected governments. These organizations will be democratically formed by people who choose to participate in them, and their legitimacy will come not from force or tradition, but from the ability to facilitate meaningful experiences and solve practical problems for their members. A global organization dedicated to mental well-being could have more impact on the life of a depressed person than any national government, because it will have access to the most advanced synthetic therapy tools and the most specialized support networks. The economic system will also undergo a revolution that will make current models obsolete. In 2030, most wealth will be created through the generation of valuable synthetic experiences and the facilitation of connections between collective minds. The concept of scarcity, which underlies all traditional economics, will become irrelevant for digital products, virtual experiences, and neural connections. A perfectly created synthetic experience can be reproduced infinitely without marginal cost. This means that the economy will organize around the creation of unique experiences and the curation of meaningful connections between people. Value will not be in objects or even services, but in the capacity to transform the subjective experience of existing. This economic transformation will create unprecedented material abundance for those who choose to participate in the new system, but will also create new forms of inequality based on access to consciousness expansion technologies. In 2030, the most important social division will not be between rich and poor in the traditional financial sense, but between those who have access to the most sophisticated synthetic experiences and the most advanced neural connections, and those who remain limited to unaugmented individual consciousness. It will be like the difference between someone with access to modern internet and someone restricted to physical libraries, but multiplied by a factor of 1,000. This neural digital divide will create enormous social pressures for everyone to adopt the new technologies, even those who philosophically would prefer to maintain their individual autonomy. But amid all these transformations, a crucial question arises: what does it mean to be human when our cognitive abilities are augmented by AI, our experiences can be synthetic, and our consciousness can expand beyond individual limits? The answer that will emerge in 2030 is surprising. We will be more human than ever because we will finally have the tools to fully explore the depth and complexity of conscious experience. Humanity in 2030 will not be diminished by these technologies, but liberated to express aspects of itself that always existed, but were limited by the biological and technological constraints of the past. A person connected to a collective mind does not lose their individuality, but discovers new dimensions of it through contrast and synthesis with other consciousnesses. Someone who has rich synthetic experiences does not become less authentic, but dramatically expands their capacity to understand different perspectives and possibilities of existence. The generation that will reach adulthood in 2030 will be the first in history to grow up with the understanding that human consciousness is not fixed, but expandable. They will not see neural technologies as invasive, but as natural extensions of their mental capabilities, just as younger generations today see smartphones as extensions of their social and cognitive abilities. For them, the idea of being limited to a single individual perspective will seem as restrictive as the idea of never being able to travel beyond the city where they were born. They will explore different configurations of consciousness as we explore different cultures, and will develop fluid identities that can adapt to different contexts and needs. This mental flexibility will allow them to solve problems and create solutions that are impossible for minds limited to fixed individual perspectives. The implications for human creativity are particularly exciting. In 2030, artists will be able to collaborate not only by sharing ideas, but by literally sharing creative processes through neural interfaces. Musicians will be able to compose symphonies where each participant contributes not only notes, but specific emotional states that are translated into music through advanced algorithms. Writers will be able to create narratives where readers experience the emotions and perspectives of characters viscerally, transforming literature into lived experience. Scientists will be able to explore hypotheses through simulations where they literally experience different physical and mathematical scenarios, accelerating discoveries through embodied intuition. Human creativity, freed from the limitations of individual communication, will explode in directions we currently cannot even conceive. But this expansion of human capabilities will also create new psychological and philosophical challenges that we will need to learn to navigate. How to maintain a coherent sense of identity when you can experience multiple perspectives simultaneously. How to make ethical decisions when you can literally feel the consequences of your actions through other people's experiences. How to preserve mental privacy when neural connectivity makes it possible to share thoughts inadvertently. In 2030, new disciplines dedicated to expanded mental health will emerge, developing techniques to help people maintain psychological balance while exploring amplified forms of consciousness. These disciplines will combine ancient contemplative wisdom with advanced neuroscience, creating practices that are simultaneously technologically sophisticated and profoundly human. Education will also be completely reimagined to prepare people for this new reality. In 2030, schools will not teach only facts or skills, but ways of being and modes of consciousness. Children will learn how to navigate between different mental states, how to collaborate effectively in collective minds, how to create ethical and meaningful synthetic experiences, and how to maintain their personal integrity while exploring expanded forms of existence. The curriculum will include disciplines like synthetic reality ethics, fluid identity navigation, neural communication, and conscious experience design. Most importantly, children will learn that learning itself will become a continuous and collaborative process that does not end in school, but continues throughout life through connections with collective minds specialized in different areas of knowledge. This new educational paradigm will also transform the relationship between generations. In 2030, older people will not be seen only as repositories of past wisdom, but as living resources whose experiences can be shared directly with younger generations through neural interfaces. A war veteran will be able to transmit not only their memories, but their complete emotional experiences to history students, creating visceral understanding of the real costs of conflicts. An elderly artist will be able to share decades of creative development instantly with young apprentices, dramatically accelerating their aesthetic education. This direct transmission of experience will create a cultural continuity that transcends the traditional limitations of verbal and written communication. As we approach the end of this exploration, it is important to recognize that these transformations are not inevitable or deterministic. The world of 2030 that I have described represents one possible trajectory based on the technologies being developed today and the social trends we can observe. But the real future will be shaped by the choices we make collectively in the coming years. Every decision about how we develop AI, how we regulate synthetic realities, and how we implement neural interfaces will influence whether these technologies empower us or alienate us, whether they expand our humanity or diminish it. Most importantly, we need to begin these debates now while we still have time to influence the development of these technologies according to our deepest values. The question is not whether these changes will happen, but how we prepare for them. As individuals, we can begin by developing mental flexibility and openness to new and disconcerting experiences. We can practice forms of meditation and contemplation that help us maintain our personal integrity amid rapid transformations. We can cultivate deep and meaningful relationships that anchor us when traditional definitions of identity and community become fluid. As a society, we can demand that technological development be guided by ethical considerations and commitment to human flourishing, not just profit or efficiency. We can create spaces for informed public debate about these issues, involving not only technical experts, but philosophers, artists, activists, and ordinary people whose lives will be affected by these changes. If you have come this far in this journey of exploration with me, you probably feel, as I do, that we are living on the threshold of something extraordinary and unprecedented. These reflections on 2030 are not predictions, but an invitation for us to imagine together what kind of future we want to create. If these ideas have resonated with your own questions about the future of humanity, I invite you to join this continuing conversation by subscribing to the channel. You will connect with a growing community of people who are thinking deeply about these transformations and how we can navigate them with wisdom and integrity. Each week, we explore together different aspects of the human condition in transformation, always with the goal of developing deeper understanding and practical tools for living well in extraordinary times. Your perspective and your questions are valuable to this collective exploration because the future will not be created by isolated experts, but by people like you who are willing to think beyond the limits of the present and imagine new possibilities for human experience. The world of 2030 may seem unrecognizable compared to today's, but within all this radical transformation remains something profoundly familiar: the fundamental human desire for connection, meaning, and growth. Technologies will change, social structures will evolve, and our capabilities will expand. But we will continue to be conscious beings seeking to understand our place in the universe and create lives worth living. In 2030, we will simply have much more powerful tools to carry out this millennial search. And perhaps for the first time in history, we will have the real opportunity to create a world where each person can fully explore the potential of their consciousness and contribute uniquely to the collective experience of being human. This is the true promise of 2030, not just a more technological future, but a future more profoundly human than any previous era.
Unrecognizable.